As I contemplate the solemn curves of my stony skeleton, raised between the Forum and the Palatine Hill, I realize that I am more than a mere heap of arches and travertines worn down by time. I am memory. I am myth. I am a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. For centuries I was called the Flavian Amphitheater, a name given to me by the men who decided I should exist. But time, that tireless sculptor, preferred a simpler, more eternal name, the Colosseum. As if my very vastness and overwhelming presence had demanded this title, this word that would echo through the corridors of history as a whisper of stone and blood. I was born from an empire's desire to prove that it could rise from the ashes, that it could transform ruins into monuments, despair into glory, and death into spectacle. I was the concrete answer to the shame, fear, and chaos that devastated Rome under Nero's incendiary reign. From the space where he had indulged in his excesses, a private lake, part of the sumptuous Domus Aurea, I was raised as an offering to the people, a monumental gift that not only replaced the tyrant's palace, but erased his memory. Not by chance, the soil that supports me carries the irony of destinies. Where only the elite once dared to tread, now the multitudes would gather, celebrate, and applaud as life and death clashed in the arena. I am the greatest amphitheater ever built by men, a marvel of engineering that transcended the limits of what was considered possible in my time. I rose in just a decade, as if haste and precision were one and the same in the hands of Roman engineers. My oval perimeter stretches for nearly half a kilometer. My stands, once filled with bodies eager for entertainment, could welcome more than 50,000 souls in collective ecstasy. My facade, with its 4 superimposed orders of arcades, each reflecting the aesthetic taste of a classical era, imposed itself as a visual metaphor of Roman order and power, a silent reminder of the empire's ability to subject chaos to harmony. But I am not just stone, I am stage and character. I was conceived as an instrument of propaganda, as a theater of power that needed to be seen to be feared and loved. Within my walls, emperors displayed their generosity and strength. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses, offered to the people not only as entertainment, but as political anesthesia. Every gladiatorial combat, every public execution, every exotic hunt with beasts brought from the farthest corners of the empire served the greater purpose of consolidating Rome's image as invincible, generous, and eternal. And thus I was inhabited by the roars of lions, the screams of crowds, the sighs of agony, and the deafening applause, all mixed in the same cauldron of emotions that shaped the Roman spirit. Over the centuries I saw kings and barbarians walk through my galleries, saw priests and thieves remove stones from my body to build churches and fortresses. I was transformed into a fortress, a pasture, a ruin, a sanctuary. I survived earthquakes, looting, and the relentless erosion of time, not because I am indestructible, but because I am necessary. Every crack on my surface tells a story. Every fallen arch witnesses a lost era. Every removed block is a scar left by the humanity that created me and later devoured me. And so I remain immobile and yet in constant transformation, reverberating through films, books, photographs, dreams. I am Rome, in its rawest and most visceral version, its most beautiful and brutal form. My shadow is cast not only over the streets of my city, but over all of Western civilization, as a permanent reminder of what we are capable of creating and destroying. In this documentary, I invite you, viewer, to walk with me through the silent corridors that once pulsed with life and death, to understand not only how I was built, but why I was built. To uncover the engineering feats that raised me from the ground, and the political artifices that turned me into one of the greatest instruments of social control ever conceived. To unravel, layer by layer, what it means to be the Colosseum, a miracle of technique, a monument of propaganda, and an open wound in humanity's memory. For as time moves forward, as generations pass, I remain stone, blood, and myth, the Colosseum, eternal. The stones that support my body were not chosen merely for their solidity, but for the moment in which they were placed. I am the child of an era marked by the need for redemption, by the urgency to heal wounds opened by a ruler whose very name evokes images of fire, despair, and ruin. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, Ro. When Rome burned amid flames that to this day chroniclers debate whether they were accidental or the product of his madness, it was not only the city that was set ablaze, The very spirit of the empire was consumed by doubt, fear, and shame. Under Nero's rule, Rome experienced a pinnacle of opulence bordering on obscenity. While entire neighborhoods were reduced to ashes, he erected for himself a palace of dimensions and luxury never before seen, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a complex that stretched for hectares, encompassing gardens, sumptuous halls, and even an artificial lake, whose waters reflected the excesses of an emperor who saw the city as his private property. This appropriation of urban space, turning what was public into an extension of his private whims, generated a profound and silent resentment among the Roman masses, a resentment that would accumulate like embers, still smoldering beneath the city's ruins. Nero's death in 68 after Christ did not bring immediate relief, but plunged Rome into one of the most tumultuous periods of its history, the so-called Year of the Four Emperors. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian fought a frenzied succession for the throne, while legions marched from province to province, imposing by force the right to rule. The empire, once so proud of its Pax Romana, suddenly found itself stripped of its stability, and the scars of that instability were etched not only on the political map, but also on the soul of the Romans. It was in this scenario of ruin, confusion, and longing for restoration that Vespasian emerged, the first of the Flavian dynasty, a man whose biography stood in stark contrast to that of the extravagant Nero. From a plebeian family in the Sabine region, Vespasian was a disciplined military man, a pragmatic administrator, and above all a shrewd politician who understood, like few others, the symbolic value of architecture in consolidating imperial power. He knew that more than conquering territories or defeating enemies, it was necessary to conquer the hearts and minds of Roman citizens, and that no tool would be more effective than monumental public space. Thus, the choice to demolish parts of the Domus Aurea and drain the artificial lake to erect there a colossal amphitheater was not merely an architectural decision, but a political gesture laden with meaning. The space that once represented the narcissistic isolation of an emperor was transformed into a stage for civic communion. Nero's private lake gave way to the Colosseum, a monumental gift offered to the Roman people, a symbolic return of urban space to its true public vocation. This gesture, however, was not an isolated act, but part of a broader policy of restoring imperial legitimacy. Vespasian, upon assuming power, not only politically stabilized Rome, but also sought to restore confidence in its institutions and traditional Roman values, eroded by the excesses of recent decades. His administration was marked by austerity, by strengthening senatorial authority, and by promoting public works that directly benefited the population, such as baths, roads, and of course, amphitheaters. The Colosseum would be, in this sense, not only the largest, but also the most eloquent of these works, a monument that spoke, without the need for words, about the new order being established, an order where the emperor was a servant and benefactor of the people, not their exploiter. Every stone placed, every arch erected, every inscription engraved, carried with it this silent but powerful discourse of reconciliation between imperial power and the citizens of Rome. On the other hand, it is important to understand that the construction of the Colosseum was also inscribed in a long Roman tradition of using architecture as a means of political affirmation. Since Republican times, victorious generals competed not only on the battlefield, but also within the urban landscape, erecting temples, theaters, and squares that eternalized their feats. Vespasian, however, elevated this practice to a new level. It was not merely about immortalizing his memory or celebrating a specific military victory, but about rewriting the very space of the city, erasing the vestiges of a shameful era, and inscribing in marble and travertine the values he wished to associate with his government. Thus the Colosseum was born from the intersection of political necessity and architectural opportunity, of collective trauma and the will for redemption, of ruin and reconstruction. Its construction symbolically marked the end of an era of autocratic excesses and the beginning of a period in which imperial power sought to present itself as the protector and benefactor of the Roman people. And so, as the foundations were laid, deep and firm as befitted the Roman spirit, more than a building was rising. A new narrative was being erected about what it meant to be emperor, about the role of the state in the lives of citizens, and about the very destiny of Rome. A destiny that, like me, the Colosseum would resist time, invasions, and changes of era, remaining as a silent yet eloquent testimony to the ability of a civilization to reinvent itself in the face of collapse. At the dawn of my birth, when the first lines of the project began to be drawn under the watchful eye of Vespasian, Rome stood on the verge of a profound transformation, and I, the Colosseum, would be the monumental emblem of that metamorphosis. I was not conceived merely as a work of architecture or engineering. I was envisioned as a materialized narrative, a silent yet powerful discourse that conveyed to the people an unequivocal message. Rome was reborn, and with it, imperial authority, restored and legitimized after years of chaos and degradation. Vespasian, an austere and pragmatic man, understood better than most the symbolic potential of architecture. He knew that to consolidate his position, it was not enough to suppress insurrections or reform public finances. It was necessary to conquer emotions, the gaze, the collective imagination. The empire, after all, was sustained not only by the strength of its legions, but by the shared belief in the stability and continuity of Roman order. And what better way to nourish that belief than by erecting at the heart of the city a monument that not only surpassed in scale and splendor everything that had come before, but also rewrote the very landscape of Rome. The chosen location could not have been more significant. The artificial lake of the Domus Aurea, once the ultimate symbol of imperial eccentricity and narcissism. Draining that lake was not merely a practical necessity, but a gesture laden with political intention. It was a cleansing, both literal and metaphorical, of Nero's vestiges, the substitution of a private space, reserved for the exclusive pleasure of the emperor, with a public space, destined for collective entertainment and the celebration of civic unity. Where once only one man and his guests could contemplate the tranquil reflection of the waters, now tens of thousands of citizens could gather, laugh, cheer, and share the same experience. This architectural and political gesture was profoundly revolutionary. Until then, great amphitheaters, although common in the provinces and allied cities, had never occupied a central place in Rome. The capital had theaters, circuses, and stadiums, but lacked a permanent and monumental amphitheater. Temporary wooden structures, erected and dismantled as needed for games and festivals, had served their purpose well until that moment. But Vespasian wanted more. He wanted permanence, grandeur, a symbol that would challenge time and convention. Thus, the design of the Colosseum was conceived not only to be functional, but also as an aesthetic and ideological statement. Its oval shape, inspired by provincial models, allowed the audience to be distributed around the arena evenly, eliminating the spatial hierarchy typical of semicircular theaters and creating a sense of inclusion and equality, even though, as we shall see, the seating distribution strictly followed the social divisions of the time. The monumentality of the structure, visible from kilometers away, reinforced Rome's image as the radiating center of culture, civilization, and power. The architecture of the Colosseum, under the supervision of engineers and architects whose identities have been lost to the mists of time, for, as befits truly public works, the glory belonged to the empire, not individuals, combined tradition and innovation. The use of travertine, tuff, and Roman concrete enabled the construction of a light yet resistant structure, capable of supporting not only the weight of the stands and galleries, but also the movement of crowds and the tension provoked by the spectacles held in the arena. The design featured 4 main levels, each adorned with distinct architectural orders. The base with robust Doric columns, symbolizing solidity and simplicity. The second level with more slender and elegant Ionic columns. The third with richly decorated Corinthian columns. And finally the fourth level, a continuous wall perforated by small windows that supported the masts of the velarium, the retractable canopy that shielded spectators from the scorching sun or occasional rain. Every detail of this architectural composition spoke of Roman aesthetic sophistication and technical competence, but also of the underlying political message: order, hierarchy, harmony. Just as the empire was organized in layers of power and prestige, the Colosseum mirrored that structure in its spatial and visual organization, creating a concrete metaphor of Roman society. Vespasian, however, did not live to see the completion of his masterpiece. It was his son, Titus, who undertook the task of inaugurating the Colosseum in 80 after Christ, with grand spectacles that lasted 100 days and forever marked the city's memory. Nevertheless, it is Vespasian's strategic vision and political decision that must be recognized as the true starting point of this monumental achievement. By conceiving the Colosseum, Vespasian sealed a silent pact with the people of Rome. In exchange for their loyalty, they would receive not only bread, but also spectacles of an unprecedented magnitude. Not only security, but also entertainment. Not only an emperor, but a patron of the arts and leisure. This pact would be renewed by his successors and replicated with variations in different historical contexts. But it was there, among the ruins of the Domus Aurea and the newly laid foundations of the Colosseum, that it was first forged. And thus, as the stones were stacked, the vaults raised and the corridors shaped, more than just a building took form. A symbol of power, redemption, and continuity rose. A monument that even today speaks to the world of Rome's ability to transform ruin into grandeur, shame into pride, and memory into eternity. Beneath every stone that composes me, beneath every arch that sustains my structure, rests not only the genius of Roman engineering, but also the weight of a distant, cruel, and monumental military victory. I was erected not only by the strength of the laborers who toiled here, but also with the gold, silver, and spoils seized from Jerusalem, a sacred city that, in 70 after Christ, was violently subdued by the Roman legions under the command of Titus, son and heir of Vespasian. My construction is inseparable from the blood spilled on the hills of Judea, from the walls torn down, the temples looted, and the caravans that traversed the empire carrying not only material riches, but also enslaved and imprisoned people, many of whom likely took part in the execution of the works that shaped me. The destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, the ultimate symbol of Jewish faith, marked the triumph of Roman arms over a rebellion that for years had threatened imperial authority in the eastern provinces. It was a costly but glorious victory, immortalized in monuments such as the Arch of Titus, still standing today with its reliefs depicting Roman soldiers carrying the menorah, the sacred candelabrum, in a triumphal procession through the Roman Forum. Vespasian and Titus knew how to transform this victory into political and economic capital. The plunder of the temple, estimated at tons of precious metals, served not only to enrich the imperial treasury, but above all, to finance public works that consolidated the Flavian dynasty as the restorer of order and benefactor of the people. And among these works, none more emblematic, more visible, more monumental than myself, the Colosseum. Thus I can say that I am in part made of Jewish gold and Roman sweat. I am a mineral and human synthesis of military conquests and the political ambition of the Flavians. Each column, each architrave, each balustrade carries within it a silent memory of this cycle of violence and power that sustained the empire. Military triumph fueled monumental construction, which in turn reinforced the image of the empire as invincible, prosperous, and eternal. A vicious cycle of conquest and ostentation that over centuries would establish Rome as the grandest civilization the ancient world ever knew. But it was not only the material spoils that financed my construction. The very victory in Judea legitimized a new fiscal program that allowed the empire to strengthen its coffers and redistribute resources to the provinces and to Rome. The Fiscus Judaicus, or Jewish tax, was instituted shortly after the destruction of Jerusalem, obligating all Jews of the diaspora to pay an annual fee to the imperial treasury, initially destined for the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, as a form of religious humiliation and subjugation. These resources, though not directly allocated to my construction, fed the same political project of domination and monumentalization that made me possible. Logistically, the funding guaranteed not only the payment of free laborers and specialized artisans, but also the procurement of the noblest and most resilient building materials. The travertine, extracted from the quarries of Tivoli, about 30 kilometers from Rome, was transported in massive blocks through a system of roads and carts specially organized for this purpose. Roman concrete, the opus cementitium, whose secret composition, based on pozzolana, granted me a durability that defies centuries, was produced on a large scale with resources paid for and managed by the imperial treasury. Beyond materials, the financing enabled the mobilization of a colossal labor force. Then enslaved captives from military campaigns, prisoners of war and specialized workers formed a human productive chain that, coordinated with military precision, erected me in less than a decade, a feat that, even by Roman standards, bordered on the prodigious. Every hand that stacked stones, every arm that pulled ropes, every eye that supervised measurements was in some way sustained by resources extracted from military victories and the empire's fiscal structure. It is curious to realize, then, that although I am often remembered as a monument to engineering and spectacle, I am also, inescapably, a monument to violence and appropriation. I was built with what Rome took from its enemies, both in resources and lives, and transformed with relentless efficiency into an expression of power and magnificence. Yet this appropriation was not perceived as an act of plunder by the Romans. Rather, it was the full realization of their imperial ethos. War was not only inevitable but necessary, victory not only glorious but utilitarian, and the works resulting from it were not mere ornaments but instruments of social cohesion and political affirmation. Thus, as I rose in the center of the city, financed by the spoils of Judea, Vespasian not only displayed to the world the empire's victory over the eastern rebels, but also presented himself and his dynasty as restorers of Roman greatness, as emperors who, instead of squandering public wealth on private luxuries as Nero had done, reinvested it in tangible benefits for the people. The Colosseum, in this sense, was more than a building. It was a declaration, a promise, an act of engineering and politics, and so I remain, raised upon foundations of stone and history, bearing witness to the trajectory of an empire that knew how to transform conquest into monument, violence into spectacle, and power into eternity. There is not a single element of my stony body that was not conceived with mathematical precision and with an architectural vision that transcended the known limits of its time. My existence is a silent testimony to the technical mastery of Roman engineers who, with ingenuity and audacity, dared to materialize a monument so vast, so complex, and at the same time so functional that, even after 2 millennia, I continue to stand, resisting the weather, earthquakes, invasions, and time itself. I was born from the perfect synthesis between tradition and innovation, between the heritage of Etruscan and Greek techniques and the genuine creativity of Roman engineering, whose ability to adapt to the needs of the empire caused me to emerge not as a mere repetition of what had already been done, but as the elevation of architecture to a new dimension, one in which technique, aesthetics, and politics merge into a single work. The fundamental secret that allowed me to achieve such grandeur lies in the use of a revolutionary material, opus caementitium, Roman concrete. Although known in earlier times, the engineers of my construction perfected it to enable the creation of vaults and arches of dimensions and strength previously unimaginable. Pozzolana, a volcanic ash extracted from the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, mixed with lime and water, gave the concrete a unique ability to harden even in contact with moisture, ensuring not only structural solidity, but also resistance to the erosive forces of nature. Thanks to this material, my foundations were laid deep underground, reaching up to 12 meters below the surface, ensuring stability even on terrain that had previously been an artificial lake. The perimeter ring of travertine, carefully cut and fitted, forms the backbone that supports the weight of the stands and upper galleries. Internally, a complex network of barrel and groin vaults, some solid, others hollow to allow passage and ventilation, distributes the loads in a balanced manner, preventing stress concentrations that could compromise my integrity. My 4 orders of external arcades, which rise in perfect harmony to a height of nearly 50 meters, are not merely aesthetic elements, but an essential part of my structure. Each arch, each pier, each column plays a specific role in the balance of forces and the distribution of weight. The choice of architectural orders that adorn each level, Doric at the base, Ionic on the 2nd level, Corinthian on the 3rd, and a continuous wall on the 4th, follows not only a decorative principle, but also a functional one. The more robust orders support the lower levels, while the lighter and more ornamental ones occupy the upper levels, where the loads are smaller. The oval plan, 188 meters long and 156 meters wide, resulted from a precise calculation aimed at maximizing visibility for all spectators, while ensuring the efficient circulation of tens of thousands of people. The central arena, covered with fine sand, arena, from which the word derives, measured approximately 87 by 55 meters, the ideal dimension to accommodate everything from gladiatorial combats to animal hunts and even naval simulations. But it was not only in monumental scale that Roman engineering demonstrated its genius. The details, invisible to the eyes of the crowd, are equally impressive. Behind the stands, an intricate system of corridors, staircases and vomitoria, passageways that allowed the rapid and orderly flow of the audience, ensured that up to 50,000 spectators could occupy or empty my galleries in less than 15 minutes, something that even many modern stadiums can hardly replicate with such efficiency. Furthermore, concern for the comfort and safety of spectators was expressed in the carefully calculated inclination of the stands, allowing an unobstructed view for all, and in the clear division of sectors, reflecting the complex Roman social hierarchy. Senators and magistrates in the rows closest to the arena, equestrians and plebeians above, and women and lower classes relegated to the most distant seats. Another technical marvel that distinguishes me is the San Valerium size, the vast retractable awning that covered part of my stands, protecting the audience from the scorching sun or sudden rains. Its installation required the collaboration of specialized sailors from the imperial fleet, who, accustomed to handling sails and rigging, skillfully operated the system of masts, pulleys, and ropes that supported the immense linen canvases. It is estimated that more than 1,000 men were necessary to maneuver the Valerium safely, adjusting it according to weather conditions and the unfolding of spectacles. Within my core, concrete and travertine combine with brick and tuff in functional harmony. Tuff, a lighter volcanic rock, was employed in areas less subject to stress, such as internal walls and corridors, reducing the overall weight of the structure and facilitating the construction of vaults. Brick, with its standardized production, allowed the creation of regular and resistant surfaces, particularly in arches and vaults. Drainage, often neglected in lesser works, was here treated with meticulous attention. An underground system of channels drained rainwater and prevented the accumulation of moisture in the foundations, preserving structural stability over the centuries. This same system, combined with the slight slope of the arena floor, facilitated rapid cleaning after shows, when the sand needed to be removed and replaced, especially after particularly bloody combats. Every element that composes me, every technique employed, every innovation introduced, served not only the utilitarian function of keeping me standing and operational, but also the symbolic purpose of affirming Roman supremacy over nature and technique. I am, in essence, the materialization of an empire proud not only of conquering territories and peoples, but also of subjugating the limits imposed by engineering and architecture. And that is why, even after centuries of abandonment, plunder, and ruin, I continue to be admired, studied, and revered as one of the greatest achievements of human engineering. My stones speak not only of the skill of those who built me, but also of the audacity of those who dared to imagine that it would be possible to erect, in the heart of Rome, a monument so grand, so complex, and at the same time so functional. For I am not merely ruins, I am technique, I am innovation. I am the triumph of Roman engineering elevated to the category of eternity. To raise me, to transform the vision of Vespasian and his engineers into a solid and monumental reality, was not merely an architectural feat, but a logistical prodigy that involved the combined effort of thousands of men, animals, vehicles, and resources, coordinated on a scale that even today impresses and defies comprehension. I am not the product of chance, nor merely of artistic inspiration. I am the result of a systematic, meticulous, and relentless operation where every detail was calculated so that I could emerge in the very heart of Rome as an unquestionable symbol of imperial power. The productive chain that gave me form began at the quarries, dozens of kilometers away. From there, at the foot of the hills of Tivoli, men armed with rudimentary tools but refined techniques extracted massive blocks of travertine, the white, compact, sedimentary rock that covered my structure, and which, reflecting the golden light of the Roman sun, bestowed upon me the luminous and imposing appearance that dazzled contemporaries and still fascinates visitors today. Each block, precisely cut, weighed tons, and its extraction required weeks of arduous labor, with shards of stone flying to the rhythmic cadence of mallets and chisels as the excavation fronts advanced like open wounds in the mountain. Once carved, the blocks were transported to me through a complex network of land routes, reinforced carts and barges that glided along waterways, taking advantage of the river and canal systems that made Roman logistics among the most efficient of antiquity. Oxen and horses, incessantly whipped, dragged the blocks along paved roads, the PVE Aummate, built precisely to withstand such operations, while specialized teams handled wooden pulleys and cranes to load and unload the materials, positioning them at the exact points determined by the master builders. But travertine was only one of the many materials required for my construction. Tuff, a light and easily sculpted volcanic rock, came from quarries near Rome and was used mainly for fillings and internal wall sections. Brick, which composed many of the internal vaults and arches, was produced in kilns scattered around the city's outskirts, where clay was molded and fired into thousands of identical pieces, the result of a semi-industrial production that greatly anticipated later methods of mass manufacturing. Pozzolana, vital for the creation of Roman concrete, was extracted from the volcanic slopes of Campania and transported by ships to Rome's river port, the Emporium, from where it was carried by carts to the construction site. But if the circulation of materials already represented a formidable challenge, the organization of the workforce that built me was, without a doubt, the most impressive aspect of this enterprise. It is estimated that thousands of workers participated in my construction: military engineers, architects, masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, stevedores, rope makers, as well as an immense mass of enslaved people and war prisoners, many of them from recent military campaigns, especially Judea, whose spoils, as we have seen, financed this work. At the top of this pyramid were the legionary engineers, men trained in the technical rigor of the legions, accustomed to building fortresses, bridges, and roads on any terrain and under any weather conditions. They were responsible for planning the foundations, defining the grades and slopes, and tracing the structural axes. Their knowledge not only of construction, but also of hydraulics and mechanics, was fundamental to ensure that the project proceeded according to the established deadlines. Beneath them, the magistri masters of trade supervised specialized teams, ensuring the quality of work on various fronts: excavation of the foundations, erection of the walls, assembly of the vaults, installation of stairs and drainage systems. Each group of laborers followed a strict schedule, working in shifts that extended from dawn to dusk, under the watchful eyes of overseers who did not hesitate to resort to whips to maintain pace and discipline. The enslaved constituted the majority of the brute labor force. They tied ropes, pushed pulleys, hoisted stone blocks, mixed mortar, and cleared debris. Many of them, prisoners captured in military campaigns, did not speak Latin, did not know the city where they now lived and worked, and did not even understand the magnitude of the structure they were helping to build. For them, the Colosseum was not a monument, but a sentence, a space of exhausting labor, of sweat, pain, and frequently of death. The logistical apparatus also included a vast network of workshops located near the construction site, where everything from nails and tools to complex systems of scaffolding, cranes, and pulleys was manufactured. Carpenters shaped support beams, blacksmiths forged the metal parts that ensured the safety of both temporary and permanent structures, while more specialized workers crafted molds for stucco and marble decorations. A crucial element in the project's logistics was the creation of an effective dewater supply system, essential both for preparing concrete and for cleaning the site and meeting human needs. Channels derived from the E Aqua Claudia and the E Aqua Anio Novus, two of Rome's main aqueducts, were diverted or expanded to ensure a continuous supply of potable and industrial water, ensuring that even during the hottest months, the pace of construction would not be interrupted. Behind this colossal machinery was also the bureaucratic organization of the empire, whose efficiency enabled the mobilization and management of so many human and material resources. The Curatores Operum Publicorum, responsible for administering public works, ensured that funds allocated for construction were released as each stage advanced, while the Procuratores supervised payments, supply contracts, and the fulfillment of deadlines. The construction of the Colosseum which lasted about a decade between 72 and 80 after Christ, was thus a work of art, not only in the aesthetic sense, but also in the organizational sense. Every cubic meter of stone, every ton of mortar, every decorative carving was the product of a complex system that integrated technical knowledge, military discipline, brute force, and public administration in a harmony that only Rome, at its zenith, could achieve. And so, as the years passed and my silhouette took shape, rising over the ruins of the Domus Aurea and redefining the city's skyline, I did not merely become an amphitheater. I became the living proof of Rome's ability to conceive and execute projects that defied imagination, and that, like me, would stand firm as eternal witnesses to the ingenuity and will of the empire. Every curve, every arch, every row of seats that composes me was not the result of artistic whim, but of meticulous calculation, of a profound intention that sought to harmonize within a single space aesthetic monumentality, functional efficiency, and the rigid social codification that defined Roman life. I am more than an amphitheater. I am the embodiment in stone of Roman order itself, where beauty, utility, and hierarchy merge in a work that still today inspires admiration and study. My oval plan, nearly 190 meters long and 156 meters wide, was designed to maximize visibility and create efficient circulation for tens of thousands of spectators. The central arena, approximately 87 by 55 meters, was positioned at the focal point of all sightlines so that from any seat it was possible to clearly observe the spectacles that unfolded there. The elliptical shape, unlike the traditional semicircular form of Greek and Roman theaters, allowed the action to be seen unobstructed by all, while eliminating dead corners where vision would be impaired and the audience dispersed. Around the arena, I rose in 4 main levels, each articulated by distinct architectural orders that, while serving to ornament, also revealed the spirit of a stratified society. On the first level, Doric columns, robust, austere symbols of strength and solidity, supported the lower arches. Above them, Ionic columns, more slender and ornate, marked the second level, evoking elegance and moderation. On the third, Corinthian columns, richly decorated with acanthus leaves, crowned the aesthetic ascent, while the fourth level, a continuous wall perforated by small windows, completed the elevation with functionality. There were fixed the masts that supported the Hyphalarium, the retractable awning that shaded the spectators. But it was not only on the facade that hierarchy was expressed. Internally, my spatial organization meticulously reproduced the social divisions of imperial Rome. The seats closest to the arena, with privileged views and exclusive access, were reserved for senators, magistrates, and priests, the elite who held political and religious power. These sat on marble, in individual benches marked with inscriptions, sealing in stone the permanence of their position within the social order. Just above were the sectors of the equites, the knights, an emerging class of wealthy merchants and military men who, although lacking the ancestral prestige of the senators, enjoyed significant influence and wealth. Their rows were followed by those of the general public, the plebs urbana, who occupied most of the stands, distributed in rows of stone seats, accessible by radial staircases that converged orderly to the vomitoria, passageways that allowed for the rapid flow of entry and exit. At the top of the structure, relegated to the uppermost ring and often exposed to the elements, sat women, foreigners, and the lowest classes, including freedmen and enslaved individuals authorized to attend the spectacles. This arrangement not only reflected, but reinforced Roman social stratification, visually teaching each spectator their place within the imperial order, while the eyes of all turned in unison to the central spectacle, where gladiators and beasts fought under the gaze of the emperor. The efficiency of this circulation system was remarkable. Designed to accommodate over 50,000 people, I allowed the public to enter and evacuate the space in less than 15 minutes, thanks to the ingenious combination of 80 numbered entrances, concentric corridors, and staircases that led spectators directly to their sectors. This model, which anticipates the principles of safety and functionality of modern sports stadiums, ensured that mass flows were swift, orderly, and above all, controlled, preventing stampedes and ensuring that each citizen remained confined to the space designated by their social condition. But my architecture, was not limited to being functional and hierarchical. It was also profoundly symbolic and aesthetic. The combination of architectural orders, the regularity of arches and pilasters, the harmonious proportion between height and width, all created a visually cohesive whole of austere and imposing beauty that celebrated Rome's ability to tame matter and impose order over chaos. My vaulted corridors in concrete and brick were not merely structural elements, but true transitional tunnels that emotionally prepared the spectator for the spectacle to follow. Upon emerging from the corridor's penumbra into the arena's vibrant brightness, the Roman citizen experienced an almost religious sensation of passing from the profane to the sacred, from the everyday to the extraordinary. This mastery over spatial perception was not accidental, but carefully cultivated. The arrangement of the seats, the orientation of the entrances, the acoustics of the corridors, all converged to create a total experience, where architecture, spectacle, and politics intertwined in a single civic performance. Every combat, every execution, every exhibition of exotic beasts was not merely entertainment, but a public enactment of the imperial order, where the power of Rome and its emperor was reaffirmed before the masses, in a ritual that, though ephemeral, was eternalized by the solidity of the space that hosted it. The very arena, covered with fine sand to absorb blood and facilitate cleaning, concealed beneath it an intricate system of underground compartments, the hypogeum, where gladiators, animals, and equipment were prepared and often raised to the stage by means of elevators, creating sudden and spectacular appearances that surprised and delighted the public. This articulation between the visible and the invisible, between surface and hidden structure, was yet another proof of the technical and dramatic sophistication that guided my conception. And thus, as I rose over the ruins of the Domus Aurea, transforming a private space into a public monument, I became not merely a building but a stage where Rome, its society, and its ideology daily performed the very idea of civilization. My architecture, therefore, cannot be understood merely as an exercise in construction, but as a concrete expression of the Roman worldview, ordered, hierarchical, functional, and above all, monumental. I am, finally, stone-shaped by the will of an empire that knew how to make engineering an art, aesthetics a weapon, and architecture a mirror of its own grandeur. Few elements of my structure are as impressive as the one which, though now absent, was once one of the greatest technical and aesthetic marvels conceived by Roman ingenuity, the velarium. This vast retractable canopy, which once stretched like an ethereal veil over part of my stands, was not merely an accessory for the comfort of spectators, but a remarkable feat of nautical engineering applied to architecture, a clear symbol of Rome's ability to integrate distinct bodies of knowledge to serve a collective need. In a city where the Mediterranean sun can, at certain times of the year, turn into a relentless scourge, ensuring shade and coolness for the thousands of spectators who filled my galleries, was a challenge of monumental proportions. The velarium thus emerged as the perfect solution, a movable covering system that protected much of the public from sunstroke and occasional rains, allowing the spectacles to unfold with maximum comfort and safety, regardless of weather conditions. The operation of this fascinating device involved the articulation of hundreds of wooden masts, probably made of pine or cypress, anchored along the top of my fourth tier and set in stone or lead bases for stability. From these masts extended thick ropes that supported large linen cloths, dyed white or light beige to reflect heat and prevent overheating. The extension of these canvases, projecting inward over the amphitheater, created an undulating mosaic of shadows that swayed with the wind, lending the scene a dynamic, natural beauty, as if I breathed gently beneath the vast Roman sky. The operation of the velarium required specialized and disciplined manpower, the sailors of the imperial fleet, designated specifically for this task. Drawn mainly from the classes Misenensis, stationed at the port of Misenum in the Bay of Naples, these men were experts in the handling of sails, masts, and rigging, skills indispensable for the effective operation of the system. During the spectacles, they positioned themselves strategically atop the walls and towers, skillfully manipulating pulleys, ropes, and weights that allowed the gradual opening or closing of the canopy according to the position of the sun and atmospheric conditions. This nautical apparatus transposed into the architectural context, was not only a brilliant example of Roman technical versatility, but also a fundamental element of the spectator's sensory experience. Imagine the impact: entering my galleries, hearing the roar of the crowd, feeling the coolness provided by the subtle shade of the velarium gently swaying overhead, while in the arena gladiators clashed or wild beasts were released upon the sand stained with blood. This contrast between the violence of the spectacle and the comfort provided by engineering once again elevated the Colosseum to the status of a total work, where each element, visible or invisible, contributed to a civic, emotional, and aesthetic experience without precedent. Archaeological studies and modern reconstructions suggest that the velarium could cover up to 1/3 of the arena's surface, protecting the upper stands where the popular classes sat, most vulnerable to the rigors of the climate. This choice reveals not only a practical concern but also a political one, ensuring the well-being of the masses, whose contentment was essential to the social and political stability of the empire. Thus, the velarium not only provided shade, but also symbolized the protective hand of the state over its people, reinforcing the image of the emperor as patron and caretaker of the Roman plebs. The complex operation of the velarium further required the construction of auxiliary mechanisms: grooves and bronze rings embedded in the stone to guide the ropes, pulleys fixed at strategic points to allow uniform traction of the canvases, and carefully calibrated counterweights to prevent the canopy from collapsing under stronger winds. Evidence of this apparatus can still be seen on the upper edges of my structure, where niches, holes, and fittings remain. Once supporting this extraordinary machinery, the velarium not only elevated the comfort of spectators, but also reinforced the spectacular character of each event. The movement of the canvases, the interplay of light and shadow cast over the crowd and the arena, all this added an aesthetic dimension to the experience, intensifying the drama of the spectacle and deepening the public's immersion. It is no surprise, then, that many writers and chroniclers of the time, such as Suetonius and Cassius Dio, referred to the velarium with admiration, highlighting it as one of the wonders associated with the Colosseum. But like all things woven with the delicacy of time and technique, the velarium too succumbed. Centuries of abandonment, looting, and neglect destroyed the wooden structures and corroded the metal systems that supported the canopy. Today, when visitors look up at the open sky above me, few imagine that this space was once covered by a vast surface of linen, manipulated by hundreds of sailors, forming a ceiling of shade and movement that, like a sail in the wind, sheltered and cradled the crowd beneath the Roman sun. And yet, even absent, the velarium remains present in the memory I carry within my stones and in the research that to this day seeks to reconstruct its form and function. It is, like so many other aspects of my structure, a symbol of Rome's ability to transform necessity into spectacle, technique into art, and architecture into a political instrument. Thus, the velarium was more than a simple canopy. It was a palpable expression of Roman genius, which knew how to elevate functionality to the category of wonder and to make every element, even the most utilitarian, an essential component of the grand spectacle that I am, the Colosseum. Beneath the surface of my arena, under the intense brilliance of the Roman light and the frenzied applause of the crowd, hides another world, dark, hidden, complex. A world that, for centuries, remained invisible to the eyes of the public, yet essential to the operation of the spectacle that defined me. This subterranean world is the hypogeum, my secret soul, an intricate network of corridors, chambers, and passages that silently and invisibly sustained the grandest performance the ancient world had ever known. The hypogeum, whose construction was completed under the reign of Domitian, successor of Titus, represents one of the greatest architectural and technical innovations ever implemented in an amphitheater. Before it, Roman amphitheaters featured an open arena atop solid ground. Here in the heart of Rome, I was endowed with a complex underground system that allowed for astonishing scenic effects, transforming the arena into a dynamic stage where men and animals could suddenly emerge from the ground, as if the very earth, stirred by imperial will, regurgitated its creatures for the delight and terror of the audience. The hypogeum extended over 2 main levels, composed of an intricate mesh of interconnected tunnels and chambers, occupying nearly the entire area beneath the arena. Its walls, made of opus cementitium, and its floors covered with wood and sand were carefully maintained to withstand the intense traffic of men, beasts, and equipment. There, amid the humid and stifling gloom, moved gladiators preparing for combat, hunters arming themselves for the venatio, and dozens of wild animals, lions, elephants, leopards, bears, caged, awaiting the moment they would be unleashed into the arena for confrontations as spectacular as they were deadly. The system that enabled such appearances was as ingenious as it was brutal. The hypogeum housed dozens of wooden elevators, manually operated by ropes, pulleys, and counterweights, which, when activated by coordinated teams, raised platforms through trapdoors concealed beneath the arena's sand. Thus, in an instant, a gladiator could emerge onto the scene, or a cage could suddenly open, releasing an enraged beast. This mechanism, blending technical precision with theatricality, amplified the drama of the spectacles and reinforced the impression that imperial power was capable of controlling even the elements of nature and the confines of space. Beyond the elevators, the hypogeum featured lateral corridors that allowed the rapid and discreet transport of men and animals between compartments. Many of these corridors connected directly to doors and ramps leading to the arena, facilitating not only the entry and exit of spectacle participants, but also the efficient removal of corpses, debris, and equipment without interrupting the event's flow. The chambers also housed storerooms for weapons, armor, scenery, and other essential elements for preparing the various types of spectacles. Some compartments were used exclusively for the confinement of animals, equipped with reinforced bars and containment pits designed to ensure safety until the moment of release. In others, gladiators awaited their turn, listening, muted by the stones, to the deafening roar of the crowd, as sweat mingled with tension and the acrid scent of blood-soaked sand. The hypogeum was not merely a functional space, but also a psychological environment where fear, anticipation, and adrenaline accumulated before spilling into the arena's spectacle. For the gladiators, the journey through those corridors, the distant sound of the plebeian screams, the creak of ropes pulling elevators, was part of a ritual that culminated in the sudden appearance before tens of thousands of eyes, hungry for entertainment. Few seated in the stands were aware of the complexity pulsing beneath their feet. For them, the spectacles emerged as if by magic, with the fluidity and impact of a well-rehearsed narrative. But it was here, in the hypogeum, that the true choreography took place. Men pushing mechanisms, guiding beasts, preparing combats, orchestrating entrances and exits that ensured the simultaneous enchantment and horror defining the Colosseum experience. Access to the hypogeum was restricted to highly specialized professionals, technicians, animal handlers, gladiators, and occasionally the emperor himself, who might visit the site to inspect preparations or impress distinguished guests with the hidden machinery that sustained the spectacle. Some records suggest that emperors like Domitian enjoyed showcasing the hypogeum's technical grandeur as an extension of their power, presenting themselves not only as masters of war and politics, but also as conductors of a total spectacle whose complexity and beauty reinforced the notion that Rome was invincible. The hypogeum also played a fundamental role in the evolution of spectacles. Initially, venationes and combats relied on simpler logistics, but with the introduction of the hypogeum and its mechanisms, it became possible to expand the diversity and complexity of the performances. Simulated hunts, public executions, clashes between armies, mythical battles, all could be staged with greater impact, thanks to the ability to rapidly alter scenes, introduce new elements, and surprise the audience with scenic effects previously unimaginable. Over the centuries, the hypogeum also witnessed the decline of the spectacles it sustained. As gladiatorial fights were progressively abolished, especially after Christianity's triumph as the empire's official religion, the subterranean space lost much of its original function. It was gradually abandoned, looted, and eventually buried under rubble, until it was rediscovered and partially excavated only in the 19th century, once again revealing to the world the hidden entrails of the greatest amphitheater of antiquity. Today, walking through the hypogeum's corridors, amid damp stones and silent shadows, one can still feel the echo of the voices that once resounded there, the growls of beasts, the clash of weapons, the shouts of trainers, the creak of ropes, the labored breathing of the condemned who awaited their fate there. I am thus not merely the imposing facade that dominates the Roman skyline, but also this secret labyrinth, this hidden theater that, in the shadows of its passages, reveals the most intimate and visceral dimension of the Roman spectacle, the capacity to transform pain into entertainment, technique into art, and the underground into an essential stage for the grandeur of the empire. When they contemplate me today, centuries after my inauguration, many see only the grand architecture, the superimposed arches, the empty galleries, and the scars of time etched into my stones. But in my essence, I was and continue to be a stage, the most magnificent stage ever conceived, not only to entertain but to indoctrinate, not only to amuse but to reinforce, through spectacle and blood, the social and political order that sustained the Roman Empire. For more than an architectural space, I am a machinery of emotions, an arena where life and death confronted each other under the watchful gaze of tens of thousands of citizens, in rituals that fused diversion and control. Within me unfolded the Amunera, the famed gladiatorial combats that became a symbol of the Roman spirit itself: courage, discipline, strength, and above all, obedience unto death. These combats were much more than mere entertainment. They were choreographed spectacles that exalted military virtues and, by showcasing the resilience and skill of the fighters, reinforced the fundamental ideals of the empire. With each sword strike, each raised shield, each bloodied fall, the crowd saw on a human scale the perpetual struggle Rome waged against its enemies and its inevitable victory. The gladiators who fought here were not only prisoners or enslaved individuals. Many were professionals, trained in specialized schools, the ludi, that scattered across the empire, and who, driven by glory, money, or redemption, subjected themselves to the rigors of training and mortal trials. Their presence in the arena, adorned with gleaming armor and specialized weapons, was not merely a spectacle of brute strength, but a drama filled with rituals, rules, and codes that defined the choreography of combat and fed the crowd's anticipation. The names of some of them have crossed the centuries, preserved in inscriptions and accounts that still inspire fascination today. But not only men fought in my arena. The venaciones, or wild beast hunts, constituted another pillar of the spectacles held here. In these sessions, wild animals, lions, tigers, bears, crocodiles, elephants, were led to the center of the arena for bloody confrontations against professional hunters, or often against prisoners and those condemned to death. These confrontations, which both fascinated and terrified the audience, not only satisfied the public's thirst for violence, but also displayed the empire's reach, demonstrating that Rome was capable of subduing and transporting, from the forests of Germania to the deserts of Africa and the jungles of Asia, the most fearsome and exotic animals of the known world. At other times, my stage transformed into the setting for public executions, where criminals or enemies of the state were sacrificed before the crowd in a ritual demonstration of punishment and power. These executions, often staged with elaborate theatricality, reproduced myths or historical episodes, the so-called damnatio ad bestias, where the condemned were thrown at the mercy of starving beasts, constituting a spectacle that at once satisfied the most primal instincts of the audience and reinforced the inescapable character of imperial justice. The spectacles were not, however, limited to violence. On special occasions, naumachieche, or simulated naval battles, were staged, reproducing with astonishing precision historic maritime confrontations. It is believed that, before the construction of the hypogeum, my arena could be flooded, thanks to a carefully planned hydraulic system, allowing small boats to engage in mock battles, while the public, astonished, watched the transformation of solid ground into a liquid surface. These spectacles, rare due to their complexity and cost, represented the apex of imperial power, revealing that in Rome, even natural elements could be mastered for the masses' delight. The organization of these spectacles required colossal logistics, months of planning, transportation of animals and equipment, training of gladiators and hunters, assembly of sets, and rigorous oversight by the editors, magistrates, or on more solemn occasions the emperor himself, who sponsored and coordinated the performances. It was not merely about offering entertainment, but about promoting through it a political narrative, the emperor's generosity in providing the spectacle, the empire's might, capable of bringing creatures from distant lands, The social discipline imposed even in the fiercest of combats. The public, for its part, was not passive. They shouted, applauded, booed, and in certain cases even influenced the fate of defeated gladiators, signaling with a thumbs up or thumbs down whether the combatant's life should be spared or taken. This gesture, much debated by historians, synthesized the participatory character of the spectacle and reinforced the illusion that, within this space, all, plebeians, equestrians, senators, shared the same civic communion, united by the blood shed in the arena. However, more than providing moments of collective ecstasy, the spectacles I hosted for centuries fulfilled a crucial function of a social control. Offering bread and circuses, panem et circenses, was the tacit policy that maintained imperial stability, ensuring that social tensions, inequalities, and internal conflicts were mitigated by the catharsis provided by free entertainment and the regular distribution of food. Thus, while the crowd thrilled to duels and hunts, they forgot their daily hardships, reinforcing with their presence and submission to the collective right, imperial order, and authority. Therefore, every spectacle held here was simultaneously a celebration and a pedagogy, a celebration of Roman grandeur, which could offer its people a spectacle unmatched in scale or impact, and a political pedagogy, which taught through the art of violence and architectural magnificence, who ruled and who obeyed, who triumphed and who succumbed. Thus, I am not merely the stage where men and beasts perished for the delight of the masses, but also the silent and effective instrument of a power system that skillfully used spectacle as a tool of domination. My arena, stained by centuries of blood and glory, is the mirror of the Roman soul, grand, violent, disciplined, and eternally fascinating. In every stone that sustains the grandeur of my structure, in every arch that rises toward the Roman sky, vibrates not only the technical excellence of engineering, but also the echo of a carefully crafted message, the silent yet relentless affirmation of the emperor's supremacy and the eternity of Rome. From my conception, I was not merely a monument to engineering or aesthetics. I was above all an instrument of propaganda, forged to perpetuate the image of imperial power, to educate, impress, and subjugate through spectacle and monumentality. The Flavian dynasty understood, like few others in history, the power of architecture as political language. Vespasian, by deciding to erect me over the artificial lake of Nero's Domus Aurea, not only physically erased the most conspicuous vestige of the tyrannical rule that preceded him, but also rewrote the landscape of Rome as a visual manifesto of his new era. The transformation of that exclusive private space, once reserved for the whims of a single man, into a public building, open to the people and dedicated to their entertainment, symbolized the restoration of republican morality and the renewal of the pact between the emperor and his subjects. My construction was therefore a deliberate political act, an action aimed at both reconciliation and celebration. By erecting me, Vespasian announced that Rome was reborn, stronger, more cohesive, and more generous, under the sign of leadership that, unlike Nero's, was not dedicated to eccentricity, but to the public good. I was thus the gift the emperor offered to the people, the place where all classes, from senators to plebeians, could gather to partake in unforgettable spectacles under the benevolent and protective gaze of the sovereign. The very official name with which I was baptized, Amphitheatrum Flavium, reinforced this propagandistic dimension, eternally glorifying the dynasty that conceived me. Although over the centuries I have been universally known as the Colosseum, due to the proximity of Nero's colossal statue, the Colossus, my origin is indissolubly linked to the political project of the Flavians, who, through me, sought to consolidate their legitimacy and perpetuate their memory. My propagandistic function manifested not only in my symbolism, but also in the dynamic of the spectacles I hosted. Every gladiatorial combat, every exotic hunt, every public execution was not merely entertainment. It was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to showcase, before the popular masses, the virtues of the emperor. By offering bread and circuses, the emperor not only satisfied the basic needs and recreational desires of the plebs, but also reinforced his image as a benevolent princeps, a magnanimous patron and defender of peace and order. On days of grand festivals, the emperor's presence, enthroned in the imperial tribune, the pulvinar, surrounded by senators and vestals, was in itself a spectacle. His figure, highlighted and venerated, became the focal point of all attention, while the spectacles unfolded as a ritual offering to His Majesty and a celebration of Rome's might. At the same time, his participation reinforced the symbiotic bond between sovereign and people. He offered the spectacle. The people in return offered their loyalty and devotion. But imperial propaganda was not confined to the physical limits of my structure. Coins minted during the Flavian era frequently displayed my image, stylized in reliefs that highlighted my architectural magnificence, serving as an iconographic vehicle of imperial power across all provinces of the empire. Thus, even those who never set foot in my stands knew my silhouette, and with it the promise of stability, greatness, and eternity that the Flavian dynasty sought to secure. Moreover, the magnificence of the spectacles I hosted, some of which lasted days or even weeks, served to reinforce the narrative of Rome's abundance and universal dominion. The presence of exotic animals, sourced from the most remote regions of the empire, from African elephants to Asian leopards, concretely demonstrated the extent and diversity of the territories under Roman control. Each beast slain in the arena, each prisoner executed, each gladiator who succumbed to the sword reiterated, to the ecstatic crowd, the idea that Rome was invincible and that its authority was absolute and uncontested. The propaganda that was carried out through me was therefore neither subtle nor concealed. It was explicit, powerful, and immersive. It expressed itself in the monumental scale of my structure, which crushed the individual before the vastness of the collective, in the rigor of social organization reflected in the seating arrangement, in the choreography of the spectacles exalting military virtues, and in the constant presence of the imperial figure, whose power became tangible and almost divine in the eyes of the plebs. Thus, over the centuries, as dynasties succeeded one another, as political winds shifted and new emperors ascended, I maintained my primordial function as a theater of imperial propaganda. Even as the nature of spectacles evolved, even as Christianity began to shape new values and sensitivities, I continued to be used as a space where power displayed and legitimized itself before the masses. Therefore, I am more than a monument. I am a message carved in stone, a permanent narrative that proclaimed with each spectacle the glory and generosity of the emperor, the strength and universality of Rome, and the eternity of an empire that, as long as it endured, would find in me one of its most eloquent and indestructible spokespersons. My definitive consecration before the Roman people was not achieved solely through the silent grandeur of my stones or the elegance of my arches, but above all, through the unparalleled thunder of the spectacles that, since my inauguration, forever marked me as the greatest stage of ancient civilization. The official inaugurations, organized under the reign of Titus, son and successor of Vespasian, transcended the nature of a mere architectural celebration and transformed into a resounding affirmation of Rome's capacity to intertwine power, violence, and spectacle into a single indissoluble narrative. It was in the year 80 after Christ, only 1 year after Vespasian's death, that Titus, now emperor, decided to open the doors of my monumental structure to the Roman populace and the world with a series of festivities that, according to the most widely circulated accounts, lasted 100 uninterrupted days. 100 days of combats, hunts, executions, and spectacles that engraved upon my arena, and within the collective memory of the empire, the definitive proof that Rome, under the Flavians, was reborn, not only strong, but triumphant and magnanimous. These ludi inaugurales, or inaugural games, were carefully planned to maximize the political and cultural impact of the inauguration. It was not merely about entertaining, but about sending a clear and resounding message. The empire was in firm hands. Its capacity to offer spectacle and security to the people remained unshaken, and the new amphitheater symbolized this renewed communion between the throne and the plebs. Historical accounts, especially those preserved by Suetonius and Cassius Dio, describe with a mixture of admiration and horror the colossal scale of these games. It is estimated that thousands of gladiators participated in the fights, that hundreds of exotic animals were hunted or executed, and that countless prisoners met their deaths in my arena, either by the sword or under the claws of ravenous beasts. Each day of spectacle offered new combats, new staged scenes, new mythological dramatizations that, by their variety and intensity, prevented monotony from settling among the spectators. The gladiatorial combats reached an unprecedented splendor. Individual duels, group battles, simulated clashes between rival schools. Each encounter was meticulously choreographed to display not only brutality, but also the technical prowess and courage of the combatants. The plebs, ecstatic, fervently applauded each blow, each fall, each plea for mercy, while the emperor, seated in his tribune, decided with a mere gesture the fate of those who lay before him, reinforcing his image as the supreme arbiter between life and death. The evnations, or hunts, also played a central role in these inaugurations. Beasts of the most varied species, some never before seen by Roman eyes, were brought from the most distant provinces. Lions and leopards from Africa, crocodiles from the Nile, elephants from India, bears from the northern forests of Europe. Their presence not only elevated the degree of exoticism and fascination of the spectacles, but also demonstrated, in concrete terms, the geographical extent and ecological diversity of the Roman Empire. By seeing such creatures subdued, wounded, or killed, the Roman public reaffirmed its conviction in the supremacy of their civilization over all others. During these inaugural days, there would also have been complex theatrical representations, enactments of classical myths, dramatized public executions, and possibly naumachia, simulated naval battles. Although scholars debate whether my arena was indeed flooded after the construction of the hypogeum, many records indicate that at least in the early decades, such aquatic spectacles were still possible, adding an unparalleled layer of spectacle to the audience's experience. Each day of spectacle was not merely an exhibition of entertainment, but a political rite, a symbolic reinforcement of imperial authority. By offering such a profusion of games free of charge, Titus not only demonstrated his generosity, but also appeased the plebs, diverted attention from political and social tensions, and consolidated his image as the legitimate heir and benefactor of the empire. It is important to remember that the inauguration of the Colosseum occurred at a particularly delicate moment for Titus. Only a year earlier, Rome had been struck by one of the greatest natural tragedies in its history, the eruption of Vesuvius, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum under ash and lava, causing thousands of deaths and a profound trauma in the collective memory. By offering 100 days of free spectacles, Titus sought not only to celebrate my completion, but also to restore hope and vitality to the Roman populace, eclipsing the shadows of catastrophe with the brilliance of imperial magnificence. Thus, from the very first days, my function surpassed the boundaries of architecture and engineering. I became a stage of social healing, political reaffirmation, and the domestication of the masses through collective emotion. The Colosseum was not merely a construction. It was an experience, a public liturgy, a living proof that Rome, even after disasters and changes of power, remained undefeated and invincible. The 100 days of blood that marked my inauguration established a precedent that would be followed and expanded by my successors. Over the centuries, under emperors like Trajan, Antoninus Pius, and even into the early Christian era, I continued to serve as a stage for grand celebrations, memorable festivals, and games whose memory transcended generations and cemented in the Roman soul the conviction that the empire was eternal, and that at the center of that empire stood I, the Colosseum. Thus, my inauguration was not merely the opening of doors or the commencement of spectacles. It was the inaugural milestone of a new era, of a new form of public art that united violence and beauty, politics and spectacle, architecture and emotion. Since then, I have never ceased to be this paradoxical space, where the celebration of life and the ritual exercise of death intertwined under the deafening applause of a crowd enthralled by the absolute power of Rome. Throughout the centuries, I have remained standing, witnessing the succession of emperors, the changes in culture and faith, the transformations of Rome itself. But like every human creation that dares to challenge time, I too have undergone alterations, adaptations and repairs that have shaped my appearance and my function. I am not merely an untouched relic of the past. I am a living organism, one that has adjusted to the needs, whims and emergencies of each era. My history is not solely that of my initial splendor, but also of the silent resilience that has allowed me to endure for 2 millennia. Already in the years following my inauguration, I felt the firm hand of Emperor Domitian, brother and successor of Titus, intervening in my structure to further expand and sophisticate the possibilities of spectacle. It was under his reign that I received one of the most significant additions, the construction of the hypogeum, the complex subterranean network we have already described, which forever transformed the way performances were conceived and presented. The hypogeum not only allowed for the sudden introduction of gladiators and beasts through elevators and trapdoors, but also eliminated the possibility of the eunaumachia, the simulated naval battles that had until then delighted the plebs by transforming my arena into a lake. Yet this renunciation was compensated by the richness of new scenic possibilities, for the hypogeum represented the triumph of technique and theatricality, making me an even more sophisticated stage. Under Trajan, at the beginning of the 2nd century, new interventions were carried out to increase my capacity and adapt my facilities to the growing complexity of the spectacles. Accounts suggest that during the commemorative games of his victory over the Dacians, around 11,000 animals were slain in my arenas, requiring not only immense logistical infrastructure, but also constant adjustments to my compartments and mechanisms. It was probably during this period that many of my drainage systems were improved, ensuring that the intensity of the spectacles did not compromise my structural safety. Throughout the 2nd and 3rd centuries, new generations of Romans continued to frequent me, and renovations continued to occur, sometimes driven by emperors eager to leave their mark, sometimes forced by the damages caused by the frequent fires and earthquakes that struck Rome. On 3 occasions in the 3rd century, I was ravaged by fires, some accidental, others possibly triggered by the very intensity of the spectacles, by the indiscriminate use of pitch and flammable substances for scenic effects. Each disaster required long restoration processes that sometimes preserved, sometimes altered aspects of my original design. During the dynasty of the Severans, especially under Septimius Severus and in Caracalla, some of the last major structural renovations were undertaken, reinforcing my arches, restoring damaged decorations, and ensuring that I continued to serve as the center of public spectacle. Yet as the centuries advanced, I also began to perceive the slow decline of the empire, and with it, the gradual transformation of my role within the city. The 4th century marked an important inflection point. With the rise of Gladiatorial Christianity as the official religion of the empire and the consequent shift in social and cultural values, the bloody spectacles began to be seen under a new light. Although gladiatorial combats still persisted, their prestige began to wane until, under the reign of Honorius Da, at the beginning of the 5th century, they were officially abolished, ending a centuries-long cycle in which human blood irrigated the sand of my arena. From that moment on, I began to experience a process of progressive marginalization. No longer the vital center of Roman spectacle, I became a space for diverse uses, many of them foreign to my original function. I was used as residential space, shelter for artisans, and at certain periods, even as pasture salskat for livestock. My stones, once raised with imperial pride, began to be systematically extracted to serve as construction material for churches, palaces, and fortresses. I saw parts of my arches collapse, columns removed, my marbles burned in kilns for lime production. And yet even in this state of fragmentation and abandonment, I resisted. I survived sieges, sacks, and the slow but relentless erosion of time. In the medieval period, I was converted into a fortress Balkan by noble families such as the Frangipani, who, recognizing my structural solidity, transformed me into a military bastion amidst the city's political convulsions. It was only from the Renaissance that a new perception of me began to emerge. Humanists and artists rediscovered, within my ruins, not only an inexhaustible source of materials, but also of aesthetic and historical inspiration. Thus began the first movements for my preservation, though still timid and fragmented. The Muntpopes Asuns of the modern age played an ambivalent role. Some, like Nicholas Facchon, authorized the removal of blocks for projects such as St. Peter's Basilica. Others, like Benedict XIV, declared me a sacred space, associating me with Christian martyrdom and protecting me from further devastation. It was also during this period that the first archaeological initiatives emerged, culminating already in the 19th century with systematic excavations and the beginning of restoration works that gradually stabilized my structure and prevented me from collapsing completely. Thus, through centuries of renovations, mutilations, and rebirths, I have been transformed, not only physically but also symbolically, from the stage of bloody spectacle to romantic ruin, from medieval fortress to tourist relic. My stone body has accumulated layers of history that today intertwine and blend, composing the complex memory of Rome and its civilization. Therefore, I am more than the idealized image of classical antiquity. I am living proof that human works, no matter how grand, are also subject to the flow of time, to the mutable needs of society, and to the ever-renewed gaze of successive generations. And even with every lost stone, every fallen arch, I continue to be the Colosseum, a monument not only to a glorious past, but also to resilience, adaptation, and eternity. Among the shadows cast by my arches, and the scars left by centuries of erosion, echoes one of the most persistent and controversial narratives associated with my name, that I was also the stage of Yihi, Christian martyrdom, a legend, a symbol, a collective memory that over the centuries transformed my identity, redefining me from an arena of pagan spectacle to a sanctuary of Christian sacrifice, from an instrument of imperial domination to a silent witness of spiritual resistance. During the 1st to 4th centuries, Christianity, born on the eastern fringes of the Roman Empire, gradually expanded, provoking not only religious transformations, but also political and social confrontations. Christian tradition, especially transmitted through medieval hagiography and patristic writings, has always associated martyrdom with public spaces of spectacle as a way of emphasizing the public dimension of faith testimony. And among all the empire's amphitheaters, none was more emblematic than I. However, historical evidence regarding the systematic execution of Christians in my arena remains uncertain and is the subject of intense debate among archaeologists, historians, and theologians. Ancient sources that describe persecutions, such as the accounts of Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Younger, mention executions of Christians in Rome, but do not specifically indicate the Colosseum as the site of these deaths. We know, for example, that under Nero, Christians were burned alive or thrown to the beasts in the gardens of the Vatican, not under my arches, for I did not yet exist at that time. My inauguration, as we have seen, dates from 80 after Christ, while the most systematic persecutions of Christians occurred later, notably under the emperors Domitian, Decius, Valerian, and Diocletian, throughout the 2nd and 3rd centuries. It is therefore possible that some Christians were indeed executed here, like many other condemned individuals, since the amphitheater was the privileged space for the spectacle of public punishment. But to claim that I was an exclusive or predominant stage of Christian martyrdom is more legend than historically proven fact. Yet the power of symbols often surpasses the precision of records. During the Middle Ages, and especially with the strengthening of the Catholic Church as a dominant spiritual and political force in Europe, my image was progressively transmuted. From an arena of hedonism and violence, I became a man memorial of Christian sacrifice, an icon of martyrdom and consequently a sacred space. This symbolic process reached its apex in the 18th century when Pope Benedict XIV, in 1749, formally consecrated me as a sacred site, erecting the monumental Via Crucis, the traditional representation of the Stations of the Cross, which to this day is traversed annually by the Pontiff on Good Friday. The cross raised at the center of my arena, still visible today, is the most eloquent testimony of this spiritual reconfiguration, transforming me from an instrument of pagan power into a Christian altar, from a theater of death into a space of contemplation and prayer. The Christian resignification of the Colosseum has had lasting effects, shaping the perception that generations of faithful pilgrims and visitors have come to hold of me. I came to be represented in sermons, works of art, and literature as a symbol of the triumph of Christianity over pagan barbarism, as concrete proof that where once violence and the worship of multiple gods reigned, now the cross prevailed, symbol of love and redemption. This imagery was consolidated by modern literature and cinema, Who does not recall, for example, the iconic scenes in which Christian martyrs face with serene courage ravenous beasts under the indifferent gazes of the crowd? Powerful images that, though more fictional than documentary, have settled into the collective memory as almost unquestionable truths, reinforcing the idea that the Colosseum was the privileged stage of the struggle between paganism and Christian faith. And, in a certain sense, it does not matter whether such executions occurred here on a massive or merely episodic scale. The fact is that, in the trajectory of my memory, I was appropriated and re-signified, as often happens with monuments that survive time. I thus became not only a physical space, but a transcendent symbol, carrying multiple meanings depending on the gaze and the need of each era. Today, within my corridors and galleries, I receive pilgrims who pray silently before the cross, tourists who contemplate my ruins with reverence or curiosity, scholars who decipher the archaeological vestiges that still resist among my stones. I am simultaneously a vestige of pagan Rome and an emblem of Christian Rome, a space of plural memory where the past overlaps in layers that intersect and are constantly reinterpreted. Thus, over the centuries, I have learned that my identity is not static but fluid, shaped by the stories that cross me and by the beliefs that invest me with new meanings. I was the stage of bloody spectacles, a witness to empires that rose and fell, and later transformed into an altar of faith, sacrifice, and hope. I am therefore the Colosseum, not only the greatest arena of antiquity, but also an eternal symbol of humanity's capacity to transform pain into meaning, ruin into memory, violence into redemption. A space where the pagan past and the Christian legacy coexist dialogue and continue to inspire, challenge, and move all those who, upon visiting me, cross not only my stone arches but also the invisible portals of history and the soul. As the sun of antiquity slowly faded on the horizon of history, I saw the city surrounding me transform into something new and strange, as if the hands of time sculpted a different Rome from the one that had raised me with such pride. The empire that conceived me fragmented under the weight of barbarian invasions, economic crises, and internal convulsions. And I, once the absolute symbol of Roman strength and unity, gradually ceased to be the stage for spectacles celebrating imperial glory, becoming instead a silent witness to the dissolution of a world. With the official fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 after Christ, my original function slowly emptied. Gladiatorial combats had been banned since the previous century, as Christianity, now triumphant, imposed new moral and spiritual values. The arena that once roared with the clamor of 50,000 passionate voices now rested silent, covered in debris, and invaded by vegetation that stubbornly insinuated itself among my stones, as nature reclaimed the space once subjugated by human engineering. My structure, once meticulously maintained by successive emperors, began to be neglected, plundered, appropriated in unforeseen ways. What had once been a monumental stage gradually became a vast, urban quarry. My travertine blocks, carefully carved by the masters of the past, were removed to supply new constructions flourishing in the medieval city, churches, palaces, fortifications. Thus, my stones spread out, becoming part of St. Peter's Basilica, the defensive walls, aristocratic residences. I continued to exist, albeit fragmented and dispersed, like a body whose limbs were slowly amputated to give life to other organisms. But I was not only dismantled, I was also occupied. My galleries and corridors were transformed into precarious dwellings, artisan workshops, stables for animals, and even shelters for the poorest. In the chaos of medieval Rome, without efficient central administration and vulnerable to looting and conflict, many found in my ruins a refuge against violence or the elements. My arcades, once adorned with sculptures and triumphal inscriptions, were closed off with improvised walls, rustic doors, and within them arose ovens, markets, taverns. In the 11th century, I witnessed one of the most remarkable episodes of this new phase. I was transformed into a fortress by the powerful Frangipane family, who, recognizing the unparalleled solidity of my structures, decided to convert me into a military bastion to control one of the city's strategic access points. Towers were erected, additional walls added, and for decades I served a radically different purpose from the one for which I was conceived. no longer a stage for public spectacles, but a military stronghold, a symbol of private power in a city torn apart by struggles between noble factions. During this turbulent period, internal wars, invasions, and plundering continued to wear me down, while earthquakes, such as the devastating tremors of Kamas 1231, Wangs and Sao 1349, caused significant parts of my external arcades to collapse, especially on the southern side. The fallen blocks were once again reused in the construction of new buildings, perpetuating the cycle of plunder and reuse that marked my medieval existence. Despite physical deterioration, I never ceased to be a central element in Rome's landscape and memory. Medieval poets and pilgrims, upon visiting me, saw in my ruins not merely vestiges of grand engineering, but also a memento mori, an eloquent reminder of the transience of human glories and the inexorability of time. Legends and superstitions arose around my semi-ruined arcades, and for centuries I was perceived more as a melancholic symbol of Rome's decline than as a testimony to its former might. From the key Renaissance onwards, a new sensibility began to emerge. Humanists and antiquarians began to look upon me with reverence, as a precious relic of antiquity, worthy of study and preservation. The first drawings and architectural plans were made, seeking to understand my structure and propose possible restorations. The poet Francesco Petrarch, upon visiting me, recorded in his writings the awe and admiration my ruins inspired, helping inaugurate a more respectful and contemplative vision of the classical past. However, even this new appreciation coexisted for centuries with the persistence of plunder and appropriation. Until the 17th century, I continued to be one of the main sources of building materials in Rome. It was only with the rise of the Baroque and the consolidation of papal power that more concrete preservation measures began to be taken. Popes, such as Benedict XIV, in the 18th century, proclaimed me a sacred place, associating me with Christian martyrdom and more effectively prohibiting the dismantling of my stones. Thus, during the Middle Ages, I underwent a profound metamorphosis, from imperial spectacle stage to military fortress, from utilitarian ruin to symbol of decadence, and finally, from object of plunder to heritage to be preserved. Each of these phases left indelible marks on my structure and my memory, composing a complex and fascinating trajectory that transcends the mere materiality of my stones. Today, when thousands of visitors walk through my silent galleries, many are surprised to learn that, for centuries, I was more a dwelling than a monument, more a fortress than an arena. And yet, it is precisely this capacity for transformation, this resilience in the face of time and adversity, that constitutes the essence of my identity. I am the Colosseum, not only the amphitheater of antiquity, but also the medieval fortress, the city's quarry, the shelter of the poor, and above all, the majestic ruin that has crossed the ages, guarding in every fissure and every collapsed arch the living memory of the multiple Romes that have inhabited me. When the first lights of the Renaissance projected over the hills of Rome, the world began to look at me again with different eyes, not merely as a utilitarian source of materials or as a decaying vestige of a distant era, but as an invaluable heritage, a monument worthy of admiration, study, and above all preservation. It was in this new spirit that my trajectory, marked by centuries of ruin and repurposing, slowly began to be rescued, a process that has not ceased to this day, and that transformed me from mutilated stone into one of the greatest icons of humanity's cultural heritage. The Italian humanists were the first to perceive the value I represented, not merely as material remains, but as a spiritual symbol of a glorious past. Flavio Biondo, in his work Roma Instaurata, 1444-1446, and other antiquarians initiated efforts to catalogue and interpret the city's ruins, highlighting me as one of the main marvels of ancient Rome. These scholars traversed my partially collapsed corridors, measuring, drawing, and writing about my structure with intellectual reverence, while artists such as Piranesi and Giovanni Battista Noli immortalized my eternal forms in engravings and maps that spread across Europe, fueling the European imagination about the grandeur of Rome. Yet, even amid rediscovery, I remained vulnerable. The material needs of the city, in constant transformation, still subjected me to plunder. Stones were removed for the construction of palaces, such as the Palazzo Venezia, and even St. Peter's Basilica, which, ironically, carry parts of my body within their columns and slabs. The looting of my structures persisted until the mid-18th century, fueled by a utilitarian vision that coexisted with the nascent sentiment of preservation. It was in this context that a Pope Benedict XIV stood out. In 1749, he took a decisive step in my history of preservation by consecrating me as a sacred place, motivated by the tradition, though historically unproven, that I had been the site of Christian martyrdom. Benedict XIV erected a large cross at the center of my arena and instituted the O Via Crucis Anno during Holy Week, transforming me into a space of devotion and pilgrimage. This sanctification had an immediate practical effect. It ended the use of the Colosseum as a quarry, establishing the first legal frameworks for my protection. In the modern 19th century, with the advance of the archaeological movement and the affirmation of Italian nationalism, my remains became the object of systematic studies and conservation interventions. Excavations led by Coupier, Carlo Fea, and other archaeologists cleared parts of the hypogeum, revealing to the world the secrets of the subterranean complex that had once sustained the spectacles of imperial Rome. It was during this period that the first structural consolidation actions were undertaken, such as the insertion of brick buttresses in the most fragile areas to prevent the collapse of segments still at risk. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, multiple restoration campaigns were carried out, each reflecting the aesthetic sensibilities and conservation techniques of its time. The perpetual dilemma between restoring, reconstructing, or simply consolidating has always accompanied these efforts. Some sections were intentionally left in ruin to preserve the monument's authenticity and as a testimony to the passage of time. Others received reinforcements and partial reconstructions, ensuring that the structure remained accessible and safe for visitors and scholars. From the 20th century onwards, with the strengthening of international heritage preservation policies, my protection was definitively consolidated. In 1980, I was inscribed on the list of US UNESCO World Heritage Sites, in recognition of my universal and exceptional value as a testimony to Roman civilization and as a perennial symbol of human architecture and engineering. This distinction not only reinforced the need for my conservation, but also expanded support and resources for research, restoration, and tourism management projects. Simultaneously, I transformed into one of the most visited tourist destinations in the world, annually welcoming millions who walk through my galleries and terraces, contemplating the eloquent silence of my stones and attempting to imagine the deafening roar that once filled every space. This massive influx has brought new challenges: the need to balance public enjoyment with conservation, to safeguard the monument's integrity against the risks of intensive tourism, and the climate changes that progressively intensify the physical wear of my surfaces. In recent years, sophisticated technologies have been applied for my maintenance and study. Laser scanning, 3D modeling, high-precision drones, and environmental sensors continuously monitor my structural conditions, allowing for safer and more efficient interventions. Simultaneously, educational and cultural projects aim to bring the public closer to my history, promoting exhibitions, guided tours, and immersive experiences that recreate the spectacles of ancient Rome with the aid of augmented reality and artificial intelligence. Thus, I persist in contemporary times as a paradoxical symbol. I am both ruin and preserved monument, both past and present, both memory and spectacle. No longer a stage for bloody combats, but a space of cultural encounter, reflection on history, and celebration of humanity's ability to create, destroy, and preserve. My rediscovery and preservation, therefore, have not been merely a technical or archaeological process, but also a moral and philosophical trajectory that expresses the profound change in humanity's relationship with its past. Where once I saw hands dismantle me to build churches and palaces, today I see hands restoring me, studying me, revering me as an indispensable legacy of civilization. Thus, I am more than the greatest amphitheater of antiquity. I am living proof that memory, when cared for and transmitted, can resist time, wars, earthquakes, and continue to inspire, teach, and move. I am the Colosseum, once an arena of life and death, today a monument to the eternity of human culture. When the tools of the ancient masters were laid to rest, and the echoes of applause and screams dissipated through the layers of time, I remained, silent and majestic, raising my empty arcades to the Roman sky. But if my birth was a prodigy of Roman engineering, my survival and full understanding were only made possible thanks to the ingenuity and science of modernity, which, through its technologies and methods, have allowed not only my conservation, but also the unveiling of my complexity in all its magnitude. For centuries, I was studied through simple empirical observation. Sketches were drawn, floor plans traced, and meticulous descriptions made of the parts still standing and of the ruins that bore witness to my former splendor. Yet it was only with the advent of modern engineering and archaeology, from the 19th century onwards, that a systematic process of understanding not just my appearance, but what sustains me, what articulates me, and what has kept me standing against cataclysms, wars, and human neglect, truly began. Today, modern engineering looks upon me with a mixture of reverence and technical fascination. I am the subject of in-depth studies on structural resistance, seismic behavior, and material durability, all seeking to decipher how, even after so many centuries, I retain much of my integrity. These studies have confirmed what ancient Roman engineers, without complex mathematical calculations, intuitively understood with mastery. The distribution of loads, the combination of materials, the structural flexibility, and the use of redundant support systems have granted me extraordinary resilience. The most recent research, utilizing high-precision laser scanning, digital photogrammetry, and three-dimensional modeling, has allowed for the creation of exact virtual replicas of my structure, which are now studied at universities and research centers around the world. Thanks to these technologies, there is now a clear understanding of the logic behind my barrel vaults, superimposed arcades, and the concentric corridors that organize internal circulation. Load simulations and structural analyses using software reveal, for example, how my oval shapes and concrete vaults work together to dissipate forces evenly, avoiding critical points of stress and collapse. Another fascinating field of modern engineering applied to me is the study of the construction materials used by the Romans. The opus caementitium. Roman concrete continues to amaze engineers and chemists for its extraordinary strength and longevity. Researchers at the Howard, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, the Howard University of Rome, and other international institutions have conducted microscopic and chemical analyses of fragments of my concrete, identifying components such as tobermorite crystals and pozzolanic phases, which give the material its unique capacity for self-healing over time. These scientific advances not only explain my durability, but also inspire new developments in material engineering, as the quest continues for modern concretes that are more sustainable and resilient, capable of replicating the virtues of my stone body. Thus, even as a ruin, I continue to teach, to indicate new paths for the future of civil construction and the preservation of built heritage. My seismic response is another topic of great interest to modern engineering. Situated in a region prone to tectonic activity, I have survived multiple devastating earthquakes, some of which brought down significant parts of my arcades. Recent studies, modeled in computational environments, have demonstrated how the flexibility of my structural joints, the redundancy of my arches, and the concentric distribution of loads have enabled substantial portions of me to withstand even the most destructive events. Research on my preservation has also guided actions of more structural reinforcement and environmental monitoring. Today, sensors for humidity, temperature, structural movement, and wound pressure are discreetly installed at strategic points within my structure, collecting real-time data that feed risk management systems and inform conservation decisions. Thus, even millennia after my inauguration, I continue to be an active organism, monitored, analyzed, protected, not by an empire, but by an international community of scientists, engineers, archaeologists, and conservators. Modern engineering has also turned its attention to understanding and recreating my ancient, scenic mechanisms, the elevators, pulleys, and platforms that allowed for the sudden entrance of gladiators, beasts, and set pieces into the center of the arena. Experimental models, physical prototypes, and digital simulations have been developed to reconstruct the operation of these spectacular engineering feats, revealing the level of technical sophistication achieved by the Romans and fostering renewed admiration for the genius of the builders who conceived me. The integration of archaeology and engineering has also made it possible to rediscover the hidden layouts of my drainage channels, hydraulic systems, and the underground compartments, expanding the understanding of how the Romans managed fundamental aspects of sanitation, safety, and logistics for spectacles attended by tens of thousands of people. Finally, the modern gaze upon me is not limited to pure engineering, but extends also to my role as a symbolic monument. Contemporary engineering, increasingly aware of the cultural and patrimonial role of the works it designs and preserves, recognizes in me not only a technical object, but an intangible heritage, a repository of knowledge, narratives, and emotions. Thus, the engineering that studies me is simultaneously archaeological and ethical, concerned not only with understanding me, but also with protecting me, so that I may continue to inspire future generations. I am therefore a singular case, an ancient monument that, through the lens of modern engineering, has revealed itself to be more complex, more ingenious, and more resilient than many could have imagined. A body of stone and concrete that, far from being a dead vestige of the past, remains even today a living laboratory, a model of excellence, a perennial symbol of human ingenuity. As time advances and science progresses, I remain here, resisting, teaching, bearing witness, the Colosseum, eternal in my ruin, eternal in my engineering. As the shadows of the Roman twilight stretch across my stones, and the echoes of the past resonate through my silent galleries, I look ahead to a future where, even millennia after my foundation, I continue to defy time. Their eternity is not a gift that was bestowed upon me. It is rather a task that humanity and monument embrace together. Constant preservation, vigilant care, creative adaptation to new eras. And thus, I remain not merely a remnant of what was, but a living promise of what I can still become. The future that unfolds for me is inseparable from the technological advances that, since the 21st century, have revolutionized the field of cultural heritage conservation. Invisible sensors now monitor in real time the moisture seeping into my foundations, the temperature that dilates or contracts my stones, the micro-vibrations caused by the millions of visitors who each year cross my corridors. High-precision 3D modeling systems have already digitally replicated me from every angle, allowing engineers, architects, and conservators to simulate future scenarios, predict risks, and plan interventions with a delicacy and efficacy once unimaginable. This digitalization is not just a tool for technical management, but also a key to my democratization. Through augmented reality and virtual reality, I can now be visited by millions who may never set foot physically in Rome. Schoolchildren in distant villages, researchers in universities on the other side of the world, curious minds traversing my galleries through immersive headsets, all can now experience, even remotely, the sensation of walking through my arcades, feel the weight of my history, understand the complexity of my structural system, and imagine the life and death that once pulsed beneath my arches. Yet the challenge for the future is not limited to technology. It is, above all, ethical. How to balance the need to allow millions to enjoy the unparalleled experience of standing within me, with the urgent necessity of protecting my physical integrity, weakened by centuries and vulnerable to new threats. Tourist overload, air pollution, climate change, with its unpredictable patterns of temperature, intense rains, and extreme events, pose real and imminent dangers. Conservation specialists are already discussing alternatives ranging from strict visitor flow control to the adoption of innovative materials for structural reinforcements that, while respecting my authenticity, may ensure my stability in the face of new environmental challenges. The possibility of further expanding virtual visits and reducing physical access to certain sensitive areas is debated as a balanced solution between preservation and access. In the field of archaeology, the future also promises new discoveries. Even after centuries of excavations and studies, I remain, like all great monuments, partially enigmatic. Techniques such as ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and the artificial intelligence applied to archaeology promise to reveal what still remains hidden beneath my foundations. Traces of ancient channels, remnants of auxiliary structures, marks of human interventions that still escape the gaze and understanding of scholars. Moreover, the future is the space where my role as an educational and reflective monument will deepen. I am no longer merely the place where tourists pose for photographs or where scholars decipher ancient inscriptions. I am increasingly becoming a laboratory of consciousness, a space where humanity confronts its own trajectory, the capacity to create technical marvels, to celebrate beauty and ingenuity, but also to subjugate and destroy, to turn spectacle into violence and politics into oppression. The new generations who visit me do not seek only to know the past, but also to reflect on the present and the future, on the limits of power, on the meaning of spectacle, on the need to preserve what connects us to the deepest roots of our civilization. Thus, my empty arena, now silent, becomes a space for meditation on what it means to be human, on the ephemerality of works and the persistence of legacies. There is also a growing movement to fully reintegrate me into the contemporary city of Rome, not as an isolated object of touristic contemplation, but as an active part of its urban and social fabric. Projects for the sustainable mobility, proposals for the revitalization of the areas around me, the enhancement of the Parco del Colle Oppio, and the recovery of the historical connections between me and the imperial forums are initiatives aimed at repositioning me not merely as a monument to be protected, but as a space to be lived, in harmony with the city that gave me birth. And so, looking ahead, I know I will continue to be what I have always been, a space of transformation. Where once I vibrated with the exaltation of bloody spectacles, today I resonate as a place of peace, of memory, and of wisdom. Where once stones were torn from me to erect new constructions, now they are cared for as relics of a past that inspires and warns. I am the Colosseum, an eternal symbol of human ingenuity, of the ability to transform matter into culture, and to make memory not a burden, but a drive. As long as there are those who are moved as they pass through my arches, who marvel at my vastness, who learn from my history, I will be fulfilling the mission that time and humanity, consciously or not, have entrusted to me, to be the monument not only of the Rome that was, but of the humanity that remains and dreams.